This is NDTV. And you're watching NDTV Hindu.
Well, the big story tonight, fuel price hikes. In a classic case of macro versus microeconomics, the government has finally decided to bite the bullet by hiking prices of two sensitive commodities, LPG and diesel. Now, for households, a hike to the extent of 50 rupees on LPG per cylinder, the kitchen bill is likely to hurt. Meanwhile, inflation-sensitive commodity of diesel is spiked by 3 rupees a litre. Political ramifications aside, the bigger question confronted with the choice of bleeding oil companies as against the bleeding households. Which option works better? Joining us in addressing this question, we have with us the veteran of political spectrum, D. Pandian, the State Secretary of the CPI. Also joining us is Raghuvi Srinivasan, the Deputy Editor of the Business Line, who has been tracking the oil and gas industry very keenly over the last years. A very good evening and welcome to News Tonight with me, Ashmit Kumar. We'll get you all the implications and reactions post the price hike. But first, a look at the top stories. Price rise soars again. Government hikes the prices of diesel and LPG. Diesel is up by 3 rupees while LPG is up by 50. Murder in the heart of Chennai rocks the city. Top officials of the police force rush to the crime scene. 23 Indian fishermen captured by Lanka Navy vessels off the high seas will be freed, assures the Tamil Nadu government. Why is the CBI excluded from the RTI? Madras High Court dispatches a notice. Centre and CBI have 3 weeks to reply.
The CBI is just an investigating agency, not an intelligence bureau, whatever it is.
Madras High Court reprieve for medical students allows students of general surgery and orthopedics to do internships without separate marks. Biju, the Tamil sailor on way home to Kanyakumari after a 10-month-long ordeal, has hostage aboard MV Suez.
And Al-Fakir, that vessel, they rescue us and they take to Pakistan. And yesterday they gave us ticket and everything they sent us.
And experience the dance power of Nama Chennai's hip-hop crew. Watch them step up.
Master, you ain't imposter. You're taking water. We can get the Tony taking it.
Well, let's also take a look at stories coming in from across the country. Digvijay adopts his googlies, describes the PM as fairly good, refuses to take back Rahul Gandhi comments. The BJP mocks him. On the concluding day, India-Pakistan Foreign Secretary level talks take up the issue of Kashmir. RTI activist Akhil Gogoi is arrested in Guwahati after he led protests on the 22nd of June. No CBI probe into the mysterious death of UP's health officer. A court rejects Dr. Sachin's wife's demand. Umpire Daryl Harper's decision during Jamaica's test come in for criticism. Dhoni and team criticize the umpire. And after the good news, the worry for Madhur Bhandarkar. What happens to the heroine starring Aishwarya? Well, first up, without wasting any time, right on to the top story. That's, of course, the latest that we are hearing from North Block is that the two interesting and sensitive commodities, LPG and diesel, have been spiked. LPG to the extent of 50 rupees per cylinder, that's starting midnight tonight, and diesel as much as 3 rupees per litre. Again, a sharp hike coming in after about a year's time. Of course, these are the reports coming in. In political reactions, we already have Mamata Banerjee, a part of the UPA alliance, coming out in very clear terms and slamming the government on these rate hikes.
It's going to hurt the lower middle class substantially, and probably they are going to suffer a lot, particularly the families who live below the BPL. So it's better if the government doesn't increase, taking into account the poor families.
See, because LPG price is going to be increased by how much, you have to tell me that?
Around 30
rupees, and in another 5 years it will be almost 5 times probably. So people don't actually consider so much because it's going to be only 1 year, but they should know that around 5 years or 10 years it's going to be more, and they should come up with it.
Well, of course, we are taking up the big question at this point, which is macroeconomics versus microeconomics. In this case, the government has definitely chosen the former. That's to protect the bleeding oil companies. Of course, joining us to discuss this question with us, we have Mr. Raghuvi Srinivasan, the Deputy Editor of the Business Line, and of course, D. Pandian, who will be giving us a political sense. He'll be giving us his reactions. But first up, Mr. Raghuvi, let me get your first reactions here. The government seems keen on protecting its, of course, these oil companies which have been burdened with the subsidies. And at this point, the diesel prices have gone up by 3, the LPG by 50. What does this mean for, of course, the common man? How are you reading this?
Oh, well, the common man is certainly going to be pinched by the higher prices, but I think the government has done a good job in walking the tightrope by minimizing the impact on the common man as much as possible. Hello,
right,
I can hear my own voice, it's echoing.
Right, Mr. Srinivasan, I'm afraid that there's some feedback there, but nonetheless, as long as you can hear my voice clearly. Now, also the fact that you're saying that the government has done its job reasonably well in terms of minimizing the impact, but we have a lot of viewers who are joining us, giving us a very, very different picture. They say that they have been facing consistent hikes. In fact, if the numbers, if I don't stand corrected, this is the 10th hike coming the common man's way. So again, from the common man perspective, how steep is this hike and how is it expected to hit them?
No, as I said, the hike was warranted by factors beyond the control of the government. If international crude oil prices go up, there's nothing that the government can do about it. But having said that, what it's done is minimize the blow on the common man by taking a large part of the burden on itself. It's reduced customs duty on crude oil. It's reduced customs duty on petroleum products. So that is going to, bring down the hit on the common man by as much as 20,000 crores. The government is going to take a burden of about 26,000 crores from the reduction in import duties on crude oil. So it has done its bit, but for that, the increase in the price of diesel would have been much higher than 3 rupees, and the increase in the price of LPG would have been higher than 50 rupees. So it has tried to walk the tightrope and take some burden on itself while minimizing the impact on the common man. Yes, the common man is going to pay a little more, but there's little that one can do about it when you're in a globally linked economy.
Right, Mr. Srinivasan, that's of course the sense that you are giving us. Also joining us on the show is Mr. D. Pandian, the State Secretary of the CPI. Now, sir, let's begin. Let's have your first reactions at this point. The prices have gone up. The common man is complaining. Your views on this latest price hike by the government?
This has become a habit of the central government. Periodically, they had been revising upwards the fuel prices on and off. But now there is a steep hike in the LPG, 50 rupees per cylinder at one stroke. The central government has announced, and every home will feel the pinch of it. It is not a market driven economy as they used to trumpet about for the last 7 years. This is an administered price hike by the government against the people. Right. And the reasons they give for such a hike are all hypothetical, false, and highly exaggerated, and will not stand the scrutiny of any ordinary man with common sense. Right, because everyone knows. Pardon?
Right, Mr. Pandian, you've made some interesting observations there. Let me ask you this also as a party in the opposition. How do you plan on protesting this decision, this latest move by the government in terms of hiking these sensitive commodities, diesel and LPG?
Because this will escalate the price of every commodity. Because fuel is the main ignite that every manufacturing unit will be affected. Every walk of life will be affected. When you hike the price of fuel, then all the vehicles and that carry the loads, the prices will automatically go up. And the government knows that already the inflationary sprawl is there, and they are not able to control it. They had been only predicting that it will come down automatically or through the monsoon or some such thing. Never as per their plan. But it had been going up, and now they are administering another dose of inflation. That then it will fall on the common man. And also the state governments also will be highly affected. All right, educational institutions will be affected.
Right, Mr. Pandian. Now, again, if I can summarize, what you're saying is essentially the fact that this will act as a trigger for inflation that already the government is struggling to rein in at this point. Let me come across to you, Mr. Raghuveer, at this point. Of course, we spoke about macroeconomics and how it's important to actually shoulder some of these oil marketing companies, shoulder their burden. But what about inflation? This is one important point being raised by Mr. Pandian here about diesel acting as a strong trigger in itself and pushing up the prices of various commodities.
Well, yes, he's right that inflation will go up. But as I said earlier, the point is if the government had not reduced excise duties and customs duties, the rise in the price of diesel would have been much higher than the 3 rupees that has happened now. So, there's little that the government can do about this. If you don't want to raise prices, what is the alternative? The oil companies are incurring losses. You cannot supply products at prices below your cost. So how do you, resolve this problem? Prices have to be passed on. Users have to economize on their usage. If you're going to give a product at a subsidized price, the value for that product is going to be very minimal. People are going to waste it. We say that very often in our transportation solutions within the country. People use their cars when it is not necessary. People use their, motorbikes or scooters when it's not necessary. Suppose you pay the user charge that you have to. People will think twice before doing it. And yes, inflation will be hit. There's no question about that. Inflation will go up because of the 3 rupees increase in diesel price. But the alternatives were very limited. And given the situation, I think the government has done a fairly good job of tightrope walking.
Mr. Raghuveer. Now, Mr. Pandian, would you like to respond to that? Now, Mr. Raghuveer has said that, of course, that this is amongst the limited options that the government had to choose from. This is one of the better options. They have created a buffer of sorts to reduce the impact as far as the common man is concerned. And the fact that perhaps prices to a certain extent play as a check on wastage. How do you see all these claims coming in?
This is a clean excuse, and they are trying to cover up their mistakes and weaknesses. Because the government levies taxes per rupee, percentage in every rupee. So whenever there is an increase, they get more taxes. Supposing if it is per liter and there is a ceiling on the taxation, then only the price hike will be there, but not the taxation. Now the tax as well as the price, both will go up. The central government stands to gain, oil companies stand to gain, the people will be fleeced.
Now, let me just run you through some figures, Mr. Pandian. You say that, of course, the duty cuts is one option here, but that is one route that Mr. Srinivasan was pointing out earlier, that the government has taken that route. In fact, the cuts have been taken to the extent of 5%. So how would you respond to this measure, that the government in its limited capacity is doing what it can to actually reduce the impact on the common man in terms of reducing the price rise? Would you agree with that, that perhaps the government is already willing to shoulder the burden of 23,000 crores? How would you see that?
I am sorry, the central government is abdicating its responsibility. It is throwing the entire burden on the common people. The government has enough money and they are subsidizing the corporate houses every year. They don't touch that. They touch only the purse of the people. They want to take the blood of the people. Right, so all this statistical jugglery won't satisfy the people. That cannot hide the truth.
Right, Mr. Pandian, that's a very, very interesting view coming in, that of course these statistics, although they do talk about macroeconomic situation, it does little to satisfy the end user at the end of the day. Again, when people look at their bills tomorrow, that's the hikes will be in place from midnight tonight. Of course, it's going to be little consolation to them, all these macroeconomic numbers. So, Mr. Srinivasan, if I can ask you another question at this point, is of course the fact that, is that a viable option, perhaps taking further duty cuts, reducing the taxes? That's the view coming in from Mr. Pandian right now, that reducing the taxes and the duties is perhaps one way to go to avoid hiking the rates over and over again, this being the 10th hike in the last few months.
This is the 10th hike, not in the price of diesel. It's petrol that has been hiked repeatedly over the last few months. Diesel has been touched after a long time. If I'm right, more than a year now that diesel prices were adjusted. So with LPG, and I think you missed the point about kerosene as well. PDS price of kerosene has also been increased by 2 rupees a litre. So that is what is going to hit the common man the most. The vulnerable sections of society are going to pay higher prices for kerosene. But that said, duties were not touched all these years, all these months, especially when crude oil prices were going past $120, $125 a barrel. It is now that the government has exercised its option. It has completely eliminated excise duty on diesel. There's no excise duty other than what is required for cess, road building cess and other education cesses and other targeted revenue collection mechanisms. And in the case of crude oil, the 5% import duty has been completely eliminated. So that is itself going to give a lot of leeway to the oil companies in terms of pricing. And in terms of, in the case of LPG, the increase of 50 rupees per cylinder is, I think, about a 14 to 15% rise compared to what the cost of a LPG cylinder in Chennai is now. I don't see, though it is inflationary to some extent, I don't see why a middle class employee or a middle class person who's probably able to afford 50 rupees more should be subsidized. Besides, there's also the other point of LPG cylinders being diverted for commercial purposes. Subsidies enjoyed not only by the common man and by the residential people, but also by commercial establishments. Right. So these are the areas where the government has to crack down upon.
Right, Mr. Srinivasan. So again, we're running out of time here. So time for final thoughts, Mr. Pandian, at this point. Of course, the sense that is coming across, at least the sense that the government is trying to project, is that the middle class is more than competent of shouldering this burden of course, LPG hikes and the diesel price hikes. Your final thoughts on number one, the government's moves, and number two, of course, the burden that the common man will have to shoulder.
It will squarely fall on the common man. The government is not going to share any of the burden. It is only like in a conveyor belt, it is passing it on to the shoulders of the people.
So, again, if I can ask you just one final question here. As an opposition party, how do you plan to take up this cause as far as the common man is concerned?
The common man is already groaning under the weight of rising prices of all commodities, particularly the food products. And now this is adding fuel to fire. They are applying salt to wound. That is what I can say now.
Right, Mr. Pandian. And of course, a few final thoughts from Mr. Srinivasan, you as well. Mr. Pandian is calling it adding fuel to the fire. It's very appropriate words being used here. Adding fuel to the fire. How would you see it? Do you differ in any way, or would you summarize your position as perhaps, as what you highlighted at the very outset, that the government has really helped the common man in terms of bracing for impact?
No, the point is this: yes, it is going to add fuel to the fire. It's going to push up inflation. It's going to add to the common man's costs every month. But the alternatives were very limited. The government, look at it this way: if the government had not dropped duties, import and excess duties on these products now, the quantum of increase would have been much higher than the 3 rupees you're talking of in diesel. It would probably have been 10 rupees or 12 rupees a litre. And in the case of LPG, it would have probably been an increase of 100 rupees or 300 rupees also. So to that extent, the government has cushioned the impact on the common man. And as I said earlier, the summary is just this: the alternatives were very limited. The move had to be made. It's actually quite late that the government has done this. This should have been done even earlier, but due to electoral considerations, they couldn't do it. And with elections out of the way now, they've probably done this. And it is probably the most optimal solution under the present circumstances.
Right, Mr. Srinivasan. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Mr. D. Pandian, Mr. Srinivasan, for joining us and giving your thoughts on this very, very pertinent issue tonight. Of course, if I can just summarize all the action for our viewers, the diesel prices have been hiked by 3 rupees a litre, whereas the LPG prices have gone up by 50 rupees a cylinder, which is going to be in operation from midnight tonight. So that's the sense coming in from the capital at this hour. Of course, it's time now to head into a short break. We'll bring you lots more news and updates on the other side. Keep watching.